that are intellectually driven. Do
Yeah,
you think they're going to be able to debate their wives into entering Orthodoxy?
that's sort of a leading question.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Cleave to Antiquity. My name is Ben, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Frederica Mathewes-Green. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, Ben. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation because I've received, since the announcement video of my intentions to seek into the Orthodox Church, I've received a lot of messages, DMs, and emails on various social media platforms from Protestants and people who are Roman Catholic or maybe from other faiths that are interested in becoming Orthodox. And one of the common, I guess, hurdles that they have to overcome is, what if my family's not on the same page as I am yet?
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm excited to have this conversation and kind of go through some ways to maybe overcome that I mean, because that could be difficult for many people.
Mhm.
So maybe overcome that in a very helpful way. But for those that are not familiar with you and your work, do you mind just introducing yourself to the audience?
Yes, sure. I converted to Orthodoxy with my family in 1993. So it's been a while for us, and I've written a lot of books. One that has been particularly helpful for families that are not sure why they're getting into this thing is my book Facing East, which is now almost 30 years old. But I wrote it when I was newly Orthodox, so it reflects my what the heck is this, and what does that word mean? I never heard that word before, and it was my husband who was enthusiastic about becoming Orthodox. And so I'm sort of in that position of a family where the father and the two sons were like, go. And me and my daughter were like, I don't like this. I don't get this. It makes no sense to me. And I don't know why you like it. So we kind of had to go through that, walk through that desert place ourselves.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder what that would have been like. What was that like for you as they're completely convinced, and I guess you had your own reservations?
Yes, yeah. And it wasn't like I had real objections to orthodoxy. I just found it very unattractive.
Mm,
I liked we were high church Episcopalians by then, so we were, doing incense and the Virgin Mary and all that. But I Eastern Orthodoxy in comparison was so Eastern, and it was so much more focused on God than on me having a good experience in
mhm.
church and feeling like I worshiped God. It's kind of subtle there. When I went to an Orthodox service, I felt like I was being ignored. And I was used to being, to some degree, the center of attention because worship is for the worshipers so they can have a good worship experience. And I found in Orthodoxy that I was kind of getting what felt like a cold shoulder.
Right.
So for me, it was not really theological or practice objections that I had. It was that I was being led into this strange land that just had no appeal for me at all.
Mhm. Yeah, I've noticed that, I guess in my own experience, entering into the divine liturgy, it is very much so, it's an atmosphere of sacrifice. Like everything that you're
Mm.
doing. Like I have for example, I have a bad back. So standing up for
Yeah.
2.5 hours is a
Oh,
sacrifice.
that.
But I look up at I look up at the icon of the descent from the cross, and I see Christ being carried down, his lifeless body. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can stand here for a couple of hours. Maybe that's okay. So yeah, I could see how that would be a bit of a shock, especially coming from an Anglican background where I
Mm.
think you're absolutely right. It is more tailored towards the worshiper. That's an interesting path of
Mhm.
reasoning. So how did you overcome that, I guess?
And I was going to tell a short story. Father
Sure.
Barnabas Powell, whose church is in Atlanta, told me that once when people were leaving church after the service, a woman said to him, Father, I didn't get anything out of this service at all today.
Mhm.
And he said, that's all right. I wasn't doing it for you. So,
That's
kind of
good.
kind of a shocking thing to hear, I guess, but yeah, it's not about us, it's about him, and
Totally.
when we can lose ourselves in worship and we're no longer looking for the things that are coming in, then your ability to grow close to the Lord just expands and expands. You're not
Mm,
looking in the mirror all the time. So, how this worked out for us was um, my husband and I have been married for 51 years now
praise
and
God.
have a wonderful relationship. And it's partly based on a decision we made early on that if we had a disagreement about something, the person that would get their way was the one that felt most strongly about it, you know? And that was usually me. So that worked out fine. Um, it was an example I give is if I wanted Italian food, but he really, really, really wanted to have Chinese food, then we would go to the Chinese restaurant, whoever wanted the most. And if I really, really, really wanted to watch a Jane Austen movie with him, he would watch it with me for 45 minutes and then fall asleep. But at least we started out together. So in this case, it was the opposite of that because my husband really fell in love with it from the very
Mhm.
first service. He went to a Vespers on a Saturday night because he was an Episcopal priest, so
Right.
he worked on Sundays. And he came home just starry eyed about how wonderful it was. And so the next week I went with him on Saturday night, and I just didn't like it at all. It felt too foreign, too weird, not emotionally satisfying. I just didn't get it. So we persisted in that relationship for about a year. Him just falling further, tumbling into love with Orthodoxy, and me it just left me cold. I didn't understand the appeal. What changed things for me was eventually I realized that he was seeing something. He was seeing something that really was there.
Mhm.
And I it was something I couldn't see yet, but I could rest in the fact that he was the spiritual head of our household, and I was convinced he did see something. And so I just made a decision in my will. I just, my decision is I will go with you into Orthodoxy. I still don't like it. I don't understand it, but it's not like I think it's heretical. So I'll go with you. And the thing was that my heart totally changed on the day that we were chrismated. It was something about that service, and it wasn't any particularly glorious, example of that service being done, but I think it really is a sacrament, something
Mhm.
that worked in my heart, and after that, I was completely open to understanding it and where it was coming from. I didn't love it as much as I came to, but yeah, that's what made the difference for me. But I know many different cases like that, and you said
Mhm.
you had some guys getting in touch with you saying, "Boy, I might be on a solo trek here, and what do I do about that if my wife and my kids are really uncertain about this?"
Yeah, I think that can be well, to your point about, the chrismation and receiving that grace there, I
Mm.
think there is a lot of truth to that. There does need to be, like, a little crack in the door, the noose,
Yeah.
to start to have things pieced together. I mean, for me, I guess I already kind of have an example of experiencing that through the intercessions of the Theotokos. It was just like the information was there,
Yeah.
but it was kind of dead information, right? I needed that little crack in the door, that little drop of grace, and
Yeah.
I think that can display itself in different people in different ways. But for me, it was through the intercessions of the Theotokos. But you're absolutely right. I think um, the people that are reaching out, I guess, from their perspective, they have come to the conclusion as much as they've been able to so far to say that, well, I believe Orthodoxy is probably the church that Christ established. So I want to pursue
Mm.
this. And
Mhm.
they maybe have come to an intellectual understanding of it and they want to start experiencing the life of the church, but they're realizing that maybe their family members aren't on the same page. I remember I was speaking to a Protestant pastor who had a very similar situation, and that was his experience. And he was saying he works at, I guess, his dad's church. His dad is a senior pastor, and he is like
Mhm.
the associate pastor.
Huh.
So what do I do in that situation? My
Yeah.
family is completely opposed, and they're more from a a
Wow.
lower church evangelical context. So they're iconoclastic, so on and so forth. So it's a big
Mm.
upheaval. What do people in situations like that do? What do they need to do,
Right.
I guess, as they begin to seek into orthodoxy?
That's wow, that's a difficult situation,
Mhm,
especially if, as you're saying, your income, the support of your family is coming from your investment
mhm.
in a different church and doing work in a different church. And the serious theological objections, that's another hurdle that I and my daughter didn't have. The people who feel very strongly that it's wrong to have icons or it's wrong to chant prayers or use written prayers, and probably most of all, it's Mary. The wonderful, now reposed Orthodox evangelist, Father Peter Gilquist, used to say that Protestants have three problems with Orthodoxy: Mary, Mary, and Mary. That she's the hardest hurdle to get over. So thank God you had an experience with her, and I've heard of that as well. What you said about that little crack open, um, my son, who's an Orthodox priest, says that at some point in conversations, he says, "Try it,
Mhm.
just try it out. You have to learn by experience. You can't grasp it solely by an intellectual means." Um, so any kind of willingness to have your mind open does help. But wow, people who have, for generations we've been in this particular church. How can you abandon that now? This is something that will be decided one-on-one between that person and the pastor of the Orthodox Church, the priest that's going to receive them.
Mhm.
And some say, why don't you just try going every other week? Bring your
Right.
wife to our church, to the Orthodox Church, every other week. And then you go to her church on the alternate weeks. And sometimes that helps. There's a way in which just attending Orthodox worship starts to answer your questions and starts to bring you around. Um, but it can be tougher than that. And when there's if a couple of years go by and the wife or the kids or whoever just show no signs of moving, the priest may say, let's go ahead and chrismate you. And maybe you want to go on every other weekend as you've been doing, or maybe you want to work something else out. But you will be bringing the prayers of an Orthodox husband and father into your home, and the grace as you receive communion on Sundays and other sacraments. All of that will help the gradual evolution of your family. For me, it was that thing about recognizing my husband is the spiritual head and I can trust him. And hopefully that would be something that would occur to some of these wives too, that
Mhm.
even if they can't understand what their husband sees in it, they can follow him. They trust his judgment. He sees something they don't see. So, but every situation's so different. And
Right.
yeah, yeah. So you're starting to hear from guys who are wrestling with this, huh?
Absolutely. I mean, I've received so many messages, it's unbelievable. But I mean, praise
Yeah,
God first off, but
yeah.
every situation is completely different. Sometimes you'll have an individual that maybe their wife is opposed, or you'll have an
Mm.
individual who's, it's a finances issue. Maybe they're, a missionary and they're abroad and this is
Oh
their
yeah.
entire income, or so on and so forth. The messages that I received are varied. But I would say, um for me, just speaking from my own experience, maybe starting to go. I'm very blessed to have the wife that I have, because
Thank
she had a
God.
very similar mindset that as you. My husband's the spiritual head of the family, so ultimately I'm going to follow, even though I have my reservations. So we go, and I remember the first time we go, it was a Russian Orthodox cathedral that we had attended, and I went
Mm.
with a couple of friends of mine, and this was her first time being able to experience a divine liturgy. Beautiful choir, absolutely beautiful church. very kind priests, so on and so forth. But we are used to, a completely different context. And being an associate pastor in a more evangelical setting and having all of those social connections, I think that is the
Yeah.
hardest part. So I think what really helped my wife was after the service, we went out to lunch with a friend of mine and speaking with, his girlfriend and so on. And they're like, oh, these are normal people. Like, this is not just, these are not aliens I'm interacting with. They're normal people I can have a conversation with. And then making friends and that kind of thing really did help, I think, for her. Now,
Yeah.
let me ask you a question. For those that are, I don't know, maybe a little more hard-headed guys out there that
Mhm.
are intellectually driven, do
Yeah.
you think they're going to be able to debate their wives into entering orthodoxy?
That's sort of a leading question,
Yeah.
isn't it? Absolutely not. I mean, there may be this very extremely intellectual wife somewhere, but I think most of the time debate does not cause people to change their minds. If you went to a debate and somebody was a genius and the other was kind of weak, if it was your guy that was kind of weak, it wouldn't convince you the other guy was right. It would just make you mad, you know, and then you'd want to have a tougher debater next time. Um, but there are those women that are able to understand the importance of the theological matrix that their husband's talking about, and some can be convinced, just as some men obviously can be convinced of that. For me, there weren't very many Orthodox books in 1993. And the one my husband gave me to read was The Orthodox Church by Metropolitan Kallistos Ware. And I just couldn't get anywhere with it because it was so much theology. It was theology and history, and the print was tiny and the pages, and I never did. I just couldn't get into it. And so, one thing that these families, these fathers might find useful is my book, Facing East, has actually led many women have told me after I read your book, then I could become Orthodox.
Praise God.
Oh, yes, thank God for that. What a wonderful thing to hear. And all I did was I kept a diary for a year, and that's all it is. It's just my reactions to the various weird things that are going on Sunday by Sunday as we go through the church year. I try to write the books that I wish I could have read back then that would make it a little more accessible, and that I try to always explain terms and not just assume somebody knows what, if I refer to this heresy, what does that mean? I try to use language that is comprehensible and, yes, just to be inviting rather than to be at that level of theological, intellectual combat, just to make it easy and comfortable.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I would ever be able to debate my wife into entering into any into it doesn't seem to work well. I mean, it's two completely different things. I might be able to have an in-depth maybe debate with a friend of mine and they might be able to change their mind. Well, first off, it's a little different because they have rapport with me, right? If it's a random person, that's a little
Mm,
bit different. Or maybe if I'm overhearing a conversation and I hear a really good argument, that might be a pebble in the shoe for later.
yeah,
But it doesn't seem to be a winning strategy for those trying to guide their spouses into the church. There was a conversation I had with a priest not that long ago, and the advice that they had given was something along the lines of, first off, don't debate them, number one. Second off, uh, do the dishes,
ah,
clean the house, maybe take out the trash. Maybe this would be the time to apply the butter just a little bit.
yes.
And then make sure you're giving them the social aspect, because I think that's
Mm,
that's so huge. If you're popping in on a Sunday divine liturgy and then leaving immediately after, not staying for coffee hour, you're missing
right.
out on what they could be potentially leaving from whatever background they're coming from.
That's
So,
so true. The
mhm,
coffee hour, I think, I do sometimes hear is the thing that actually persuades people. We
mhm,
call it coffee hour, but I think at most churches it's more like lunch, and it's a full meal, and people sit around for an hour or more just chatting and getting to know each other, and that supplies the social relationships in a non-threatening way. And yeah, as you say, you discover that these are actually normal people. They have the same kind of car, they watch the same kind of shows. It normalizes it, and it shows that it is possible for ordinary people to do this Orthodox thing in their daily lives, without having to turn into some completely other kind of person, or a desert dweller or monastic.
Yeah.
One of the hard things I've seen over the years is, if the wife is okay with it, but the kids object.
Mm.
And it's usually because they're teens and they're in the youth group, and they don't want to leave their friends behind when they go, into another church. And that's a sensitive thing. You want to continue to, beckon and call them in, and even, if necessary, exercise authority as the head of the household and say, this is what we're going to do. But you can keep going to that youth group. You can continue having those friends. You can invite them over. We can take them to church with us sometimes. Um, yeah, that is, as I said, another one of those problems you have sometimes when it's not even the wife, but it's the kids that are having a hard time with it.
Hmm. I think the answer for both is probably about the same, right? You just get them integrated into the social aspects of the church
Mm,
wherever you're at. Maybe, well, we're gonna go sit with the other family that has kids or something. You start making some friends, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that's been the approach that at least I've taken, because I have a 9-year-old daughter,
Mm,
so we were obviously very involved in my previous church, and she was involved in the Sunday school and all of that type of
mhm.
stuff. So having her make friends in the new church has been crucial, because obviously as a father, my the spiritual formation of my family is like of the utmost importance to me, and
Right.
especially my daughter. I've told her many times. I said, you know what, um, no matter how anything else goes in life, as long as you remain in the faith, I will be
That's
okay.
that's
you know
yeah,
so
yeah.
we've had that conversation several times, but I think the social piece is super super important for not only the spouse but also for the children. Absolutely. But I guess maybe the more difficult thing would be in situations where, maybe going back to the example that I brought up earlier with the associate pastor, maybe the
Mm.
family's going to disown you for becoming Orthodox. What how would
Well,
you how would you advise someone to navigate those waters?
yes, that's a terrible, such a wounding, thing to happen. That's um, a terrible pain to bear. And, do everything that you can from your side to maintain those relationships and to continue to show love for them. And when they say hurtful things to you, just try to deflect it. Don't
Mhm.
focus on it. Don't get tangled up in it. Yeah, I think maybe you could say, well, that actually isn't what Orthodox believe, what you're
Right,
accusing me of. But maybe we can talk about that some other time, because, when people are in argument mode, they're not really susceptible to
right.
listening to anything new. So, yeah, um, boy, I have heard some stories like that, and it's very hard and very painful. And if you can go on living a double life to some extent, and continue going to the Orthodox Church when you can, maybe you go to part of the liturgy on Sunday, but then go to the liturgy where you have obligations. There's plenty of time. God has plenty of time in His universe, and He is trying to speak to everybody else in that situation as well, not just you, as He draws you toward the Orthodox faith. He's speaking to all these other people who, at least in theory, also love His Son, Jesus Christ, with all their hearts. And so just keep on praying, stay loving, stay polite. If you find that arguing actually makes a good conversation, then maybe keep doing that. But if it's futile, if it's not getting you anywhere, then just try to avoid getting pulled up into that. And again, that's the thing to discuss with your Orthodox priest. is,
Mm.
should I go ahead and be chrismated and become officially an Orthodox Christian, or would it be better for me to wait? What I found over the years is that people who are evangelical Protestants, they don't so much mind waiting. They enjoy the worship. They like being part of worship, but they don't have what a Catholic or a high church Anglican or Lutheran perhaps would have, which is the sense of not receiving the sacraments. They're so used to going to church every Sunday and receiving the body and blood of Christ. And to do without that for very long is very painful for them.
Mhm.
So a priest will take that into account as well. Just try to support them as much as he can as they take a very, very difficult, very painful step.
Yeah. I
I've
think
certainly heard stories, though, where I disown you. And then, 3 years later, that person is now Orthodox.
right.
So God can
Yes.
do anything.
Absolutely. I think that's probably very common. I remember it draws me back to a conversation that I had with a Muslim gentleman, and back in the day, I would do many kind of interreligious dialogues. We'll say maybe not necessarily like an aggressive debate, but we'd have dialogues. And in the moment, the gentleman was very frustrated. He wasn't.
Mm.
We were talking about the divinity of Christ, and I was bringing up passage after passage. And at the end of it, he was like, "Oh, well, you know what? That's a load of nonsense. I'm never speaking to you again," kind of thing. A couple of months later, he messages me, "Hey, actually, I was thinking about what you were saying, and I want to become a Christian." So, like that kind of thing happens. You might have your
It
family
sure
member
does.
that's frustrated in the moment, and they lash out and they say, "I'm never speaking to you again."
Mm,
9 times out of 10, it's not what they're saying, it's something behind it. Either maybe it could be a sense of insecurity in their own position. Maybe they looked up to you,
that
or
could
it
be.
could be a sense of frustration from a financial aspect if you were
Mm,
working at their church, for instance, with the gentleman I was speaking about. Or maybe maybe they genuinely do think they have some objections against the faith, and this will be a catalyst for them to investigate further. So you never know what's going on in the background in their mind. So
right,
give it
right.
time, I would say, and just try to be the best like Orthodox you could be. Because for me, in my situation, I noticed immediately after my announcement, a lot of my colleagues were
Mm.
were lashing out and were disowning me and things like that.
God
And I'm
bless
like, you
you.
know what? I'm sure I'll hear from you, like a lot of you, in maybe a month or two. So God bless you guys. That's it. That's all you can do. Um, but
Well, like you're saying, I've known many, many cases where somebody would say, "My sister's joining this cult, the Orthodox Church. Well, I'm going to read everything I can about it so I can prove to her it's wrong."
right.
And the more they read, the closer they get to being convinced. My husband always says, "Why did he become Orthodox? Because he read too much." No, you reach a certain point in your reading where it's too late. You're going
Mhm.
going over the falls at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what ended up happening with me. I was convinced by I did a lot of dialogues on canon law and Orthodox ecumenical councils. So, or in comparison to Roman Catholic canon law, we would
Mm,
have dialogues and discussions. And I was thinking from a Protestant perspective. I'm like, well, if I want to have any kind of continuity with the early church, let me look at what they said about the ecumenical councils, their contemporaries.
mm,
Well, they'd say they were guided by the Holy Spirit. They were divinely inspired, right? And they had these things called anathemas. If I were to look at any of the Protestant denominations, do any of them hold to these?
mm.
Or are they holding to branch theory? Are they holding to something completely foreign from the first millennium church? And for
Wow.
me, it came to a certain point. I was like, well, if I do internal critiques of each system, the only one that's consistent would be the Orthodox Church. So they're still holding to the same system of ecclesiology from the first 1,000 years of the church. They're still holding the ecumenical councils in their original forms, not
Mm.
developed off into some kind of
Yeah,
hyper nuanced understanding of them. It's like, no, this is what they meant. We're
and
going
it's
to
the
follow
same
them this way.
all over the world and all through time. I gradually realized that was the case. I was very surprised to learn how much all Orthodox churches really have in common, that we really are believing the same thing, and also that there are no breaks in the history. It's just one continuous story. There's Not, it didn't have to get lost and then rediscovered. It's not archaeology. It is a continuous life of the church. So
Mhm.
that's pretty convincing in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So any closing advice that you want to give to somebody who's in a situation, maybe they're seeking into the Orthodox Church and they're experiencing some familial issues. What are some parting words you'd like to give with them?
Oh, sure. Um, to the men in this situation, which is going to be, you know, 85 or 90%, um, the first thing to do is to love your wife
Mhm.
and make sure she knows you love her in ways that she will recognize as love, and do the best job you can of that the whole time you're not talking about orthodoxy. Just be present for her and do the things that will make her love you right back, and pray for her all the time, because it is, if you're convinced, then it's the Lord's will that she come with you. And the Lord is totally capable of putting things in her path that she will run into or discover along the way that will eventually be totally convincing to her. And hopefully, she will have a realization, if nothing else, like mine, that I came to see my husband cares more strongly about this than I do. So we're going to go with it. And then discovering how wonderful it was. The more she gets closer to it, the more it will attract her. And as I said earlier, so many women have told me that it was my book, Facing East, that made it possible for her to envision herself in an Orthodox life and how really normal that could be. So I'll recommend that as well. Just love her as well as you can, and keep bringing her to Orthodox worship. If you go every other week, perhaps, because so many women who had strong intellectual theological objections, when I ask them, well, how did your objections get solved? They tell me, I guess I never did. I guess I never did hear an answer that made sense to me, that changed my mind. But just going to worship, standing in worship over and over again, it just washes over you. It gets into your soul. And they would say the question just kind of dissolved. It was like they weren't all that important in the long run. So but keep loving her, keep praying for her, and you'll find there are many, many, many other couples like that who went ahead of you following that same road.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything that you'd like to maybe plug before we wrap up here?
I have a Substack, Frederica's World. I've got a website, fredericamg.com, and I just hope that I will catch up with you somewhere or other. And I answer email, so you'll find my email address either of those places. And if you want to talk about something, I'm always glad to be there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much for watching. God bless.